Hello there, and welcome to Gooner U, where there are no degrees because the learning never stops. I'm Dove, a TA here at Gooner U, and my friend Keith is our stalwart, distinguished professor of Arsenal and football studies. Enter our classroom as we discuss the week's news involving Arsenal, Premier League, Champions League, Carabao Cup, and international football, all from the perspective of a couple Americans. This week featured two away matches at Preston North End in the League Cup, or Carabao Cup if you prefer, and at St. James Park against Newcastle United in the Premier League. Hello, Keith.
Dove, I've had a rough week. The Yankees lost in rather embarrassing fashion. TCU lost on a last-second field goal to stupid Baylor. And then there was Arsenal, which is where we're going to spend most of our time today. So, yeah, it's been a rough week. I don't know Halloween, and I'm not really a Halloween guy. I don't know what else to say.
Nothing there to buoy your spirits a little, yeah.
Yeah, but you're a Halloween guy, so I don't know. Would this week go better for you, I guess? I don't know. Outside of what we're going to talk about for the next hour?
Halloween was good, except I goofed big time with my son's costume. He was supposed to be a Minion from the Despicable Me and Minions movies. He was in an inflatable costume, which was his first time doing that. And he was complaining the whole time that he couldn't see, to the point where he ended up actually taking the costume off midway through trick-or-treating because it was too frustrating for him. And then I found out the next day that there were little internal shoulder straps that he was supposed to have on over his shoulders that would have ameliorated the problem, and I just didn't see it when I was helping him put on the costume. So,
yeah, there's something to be said for that. I guess the things you didn't see until after the fact. It's not actually foreshadowing it, but it feels like it should be. Anyway.
On the bright side, though, my son pointed out to me today that his rec youth soccer team is having a better season than Arsenal, and I really couldn't disagree with him.
That I'll take the positive side of that. It speaks well to his team and how well they're doing. That's a good thing.
Yes. They have one match left. They have won every single match so far this season. So closing in on a perfect season. Although one of our two key strikers that are scoring all of our goals cannot make the next match. So it's going to really put them to the test. So.
Well, there's speaking of Arsenal connections.
Yeah. All right, well, a little tiny bit of follow-up. We talked about the half-and-half scarves last week that we saw during the Shakhtar Donetsk match. And as I was looking up imagery to use in our short on that topic, I found, first of all, that the term people use for them is half-and-half scarves. I guess that is the standard term that is used for those. And apparently also sometimes people will buy and apparently wear half-and-half jerseys, which also seems like a strange idea and rubs some people the wrong way.
The scarf is about the occasion. Like a lot of times you'll see like the date emblazoned on them. You know, I was at Arsenal, Shakhtar on this, whatever it was, in October day. The jersey, the ones I see that aren't totally weird are ones where you've got like a player's club team and then their national team. Like you'll see a Messi Barcelona and Argentina. When it's two club teams, that's weird. That's a little weird.
Yep.
Yeah, that one I'm kind of on the not so okay with that bandwagon myself, but that's your money.
Yeah, right. So the next thing I wanted to check in on is, especially in light of yesterday's Newcastle match, how the heck is Ødegaard doing?
Yeah. We don't actually have any news. Arteta doesn't really say anything about injuries except as little as possible. For most of the injured players, you can really sort of tell how they're doing based on whether or not they played this week. And if they played, they're healthy enough to play at least some, if not, obviously, all of the match. Ødegaard, though, is sort of the linchpin piece. The rumors floating around is that he may potentially be available by the Chelsea game this weekend.
That would certainly be welcome. Yeah.
Yes, there were rumors that Norway is thinking about calling him up, which of course would be preceded by him being able to play for Arsenal, at least theoretically.
Right.
I think.
It would also be a little bit of the hair of the dog that bit you.
I understand. Again, as someone who has a dog in the hunt regarding international football, at least with the U.S., like I get it. Like you have Martin Ødegaard and Erling Haaland. You have two of the best players of the world, and the rest of your team is not. Seeing as that like Norway doesn't qualify for the Euros, is in the middle level of the Nations League, doesn't qualify for the World Cup. Yeah, so I get wanting him and sort of wanting him there, but obviously from an Arsenal perspective, it's very like you don't want him to go if he's not ready to come back for Arsenal. So there are rumors floating around. My sense of that is, at the very least, barring injury picked up perhaps with Norway, I think he will be back playing with Arsenal before the end of November, which I realize I'm saying that at the beginning of November, but certainly by the end of within the next couple of weeks, hopefully, we'll see Martin Ødegaard back in an Arsenal shirt, which would be welcome for all kinds of reasons. If for no other reason than he's really, really good. And I like it when our best players play.
Yeah, sentiment myself and probably most of our viewers and listeners would share with you. Before we get to the week's Arsenal matches, we're in the playoffs for MLS. How's that shaping up?
Right, so we're actually, so obviously you won't know this because you're watching this on, whenever it gets posted, but we're actually a little late on recording because I was watching the end of the Houston-Seattle shootout, which Seattle won. Thereby winning their series. Actually, as we speak right now, there's so MLS in their round one, because sure, why not? We'll have a best 2 out of 3 series where they play the game, and if it ends in a draw in regulation, it goes directly to penalties, and the penalty, if you win the shootout, you win the game. Houston lost 2 shootouts to Seattle, so they're eliminated. Along with the 2 of the other 4 matchups on the Western Conference. So the LA Galaxy are through and the Minnesota United are through. The only other one is LAFC, who actually, as we record this, shortly before halftime is trailing 2-0 against Vancouver. So that'll be interesting. So the West, 3 out of the 4 have advanced. In the East, 3 out of the 4 are set to go to a game 3, including Atlanta got a win over Miami to even that series up. What else are we looking at? Charlotte and Orlando are 1-1 headed back to Central Florida. And then New York City beat Cincinnati yesterday 3-1, so they'll play in Cincinnati on the weekend. I think that's on Sunday. I think I saw when that one is. And the only Eastern series that's just ended earlier today. The New York Red Bulls won on penalties. They upset Columbus to knock the defending champions, the Crew, out of the playoffs, which is a bit of a shocker to see the Crew go out. They were one of the favorites to win it, I think, or certainly on the short list of teams that were likely to win it. So, and it had to be Red Bulls too.
When it goes to penalties, it's not exactly a coin flip, but it's pretty close to a coin flip in a lot of ways. So it is surprising that they were eliminated, but if penalties are part of a structure, then
yeah, and I mean, credit to Red Bulls, who won the first leg 1-0 in Columbus, which is a difficult thing to do outright. No penalties there. This one is actually, apparently they were up 2-1 late, and it was in stoppage time that the Crew scored to level, and so you kind of think, uh-oh, here they come. But yeah, penalties come, they get a couple saves, and there we go. You're done. That's the end of your season. We'll see you in 2025, Columbus Crew.
Yeah, interesting. All right, so let's begin the Arsenal talk for the week. So first match was Preston North End. This was October 30th, so Wednesday of this past week. And we ended up winning with a clean sheet, 3-0 against Preston North End. It was certainly more fun to watch than the Newcastle match, and different in just about every way in which a match could be different from another one. I mean, they were the same sport. They have that in common. The rules were the same, although no VAR, I think, actually, though, right?
Was it there? I gotta be honest. I watched the first half of this one in my office and was technically doing other things while I was...
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure there wasn't. The commentators made mention of that, where like they either raised the offside flag or they didn't, and that was it. I think, and they were saying, they were espousing the virtues of that and how the match moves along a lot more quickly when that's the case.
I mean, of all the criticism of VAR, I get it, right? Like, it does cause a certain level of delay, but as we talked about, there were things you can do that actually expedite some of those delays, and they don't.
Right.
Yeah,
they're not comparing against an idealized form of VAR. They're comparing it against VAR as we have it in the Premier League.
Right. And obviously, I think also part of the reason they probably don't have it is because once you start to go down the table, down the pyramid, it becomes less and less likely to have the cameras and all that set up.
Right. Right.
And it is done, I think, with a certain eye of fairness, right? That it has to be available for all matches, or it can't be available for any of them,
right?
Which I'm sure plays into, like we talk about, semi-automated offsides. Now, why that's not the case, I don't know, but we're not getting into that. I had my rant. We're going to go there. But yeah, we were up at Preston this week. A little Invincibles showdown. We've mentioned this historically. Preston are the only other club to have finished an entire season without defeat. They did so back in the very first season of the Football League.
Wow.
And it's been kind of downhill since then for Preston. That's not entirely true, but it's not entirely wrong either. So it's been a while for them. And I'll be honest, having only watched the first half, I thought it was kind of what I expected in that regard. I mean, Preston is better than Bolton. But still a division down, and that's kind of, again, having talked about our cups the last couple of years, drawing Premier League sides in the League Cup and the FA Cup, to get two non-league sides consecutively was kind of a nice little palate cleanser after the way our league schedule has gone, which our league schedule has not been easy to this stage. No. Just kind of worked out that way so far to this point, but. Yeah, I think 3-0 is a fair result, even with a pretty heavily rotated lineup.
Yeah, and so it was interesting. Apparently, Preston North End was the last championship team still in the competition at the time that we played them. So apparently they're one of the better championship teams. It would seem. I don't know what their place is in the table right now, but they weren't awful. They were better than Bolton, and they weren't pushovers. They had some good moments. They had some good plays, but this was not a level comparison between the two.
Yeah, I mean, right. I mean, this is the kind of the team you want to draw. They're towards the bottom of the table in the championship right now. They're not having a particularly good season, but it's the kind of game you want to draw to this point. Which is nice after we've talked about some of the previous matchups we've gotten drawn in the cups. And then, but most importantly, we did what we were supposed to do. And that's really what you were looking for at this stage.
Mm-hmm. So we're on to the quarterfinals now. That's good. Before we talk about that, you want to talk about the goals in the match at least? I mean, that first one, that kick that Jesus made was like a karate kick, like a side kick, like a Chuck Norris style kick to slam it in.
Yeah, I mean, so we were a heavily rotated side. I mean, obviously Saliba got the run out, which makes sense after not playing in the Liverpool game. He was feeling a little fresh. Good to see Timber play after getting a knock. Not surprised to see Kivior. Good to see Zinchenko back in the lineup. Jorginho, of course. Gabriel Jesus. Raheem Sterling, and then also Ethan Nwaneri, which is what you'd expect in this competition. I expect we may have seen Miles Lewis-Skelly, except for the fact that we saw him against Liverpool, and Zinchenko hasn't really had any minutes to this point, so that wasn't a surprise to see him play. Probably the biggest one was young Tommy Setford getting the start between the sticks, as it were. He was, as I've gathered, he was probably likely to start in the previous round against Bolton, except he was nursing an injury. And Neto, our number 2, is cup tied through I believe Bournemouth, and so Raya had to play the Bolton game, and so Setford, now healthy, got the start. And I have to admit, out of what I saw in the first half, Arsenal spent most of the entire game camped out in the Preston end. So I
He didn't have
understand
much to do. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand he had a few things to do in the second half, but I certainly I didn't necessarily see anything that he did. So I don't know. Was he? I hear he was okay.
He was fine. I mean, he didn't have enough time on the ball to really say one way or another. He didn't stand out to me one way or another. And ultimately, I mean, I guess it doesn't really probably matter much. We're not going to see him much more. I don't think he is necessarily even that. We've made it into the quarterfinals. When you tell me, once we're in the quarterfinals and beyond, would Raya step in at that point? Even though, like, I mean, if we had Neto, right, it wouldn't be crazy to me that our second keeper would stick with the cup competition. But since we can't use Neto, do we stick with our third choice keeper, or do we just have Raya play, in those matches?
That'll be kind of interesting to see how Arteta approaches that, since we haven't really seen that, at least not in the League Cup. I mean, Arsene Wenger's philosophy was that it was a youth tournament, and he treated not I don't want to say treat it like a youth tournament, like it was separate, but he used it as an opportunity to run out young players, and to the point where, rather famously, we went to two finals that I can think of. I want to say 2007, and I want to say like 2011. I think was the other one. I mean, we went to two finals, and generally the kids got the run out even into the final, and it, on a certain level, kind of cost us in both of those games. I don't know. I'm curious to see how Arteta approaches this. I suspect you'll see Setford more to give Raya a breather. So quickly, not that it's going to spoil too much. We drew Crystal Palace at home in the quarterfinals, and that game will be between a home game against Everton and an away game to Crystal Palace in the league. Yeah, I guess you'd probably see Setford there. I guess probably. I don't really know what to make of Palace yet this season. Everton is going to be a very set piece heavy team, so a set piece heavy game. I expect to want Riot in there, and that's not a game. I don't think that's a game necessarily to want Neto. So, I guess you might see Setford again. I don't know. I'm kind of curious how Arteta's thinking about it with Premier League opposition.
Right.
To me, the much more interesting question would be what would happen if we wound up in the final. Had a real chance to win a trophy, because from Arsene Wenger's perspective, the kid's got us there. The kid plays.
Right.
I don't know how Arteta's going to think about that. And by that point, by the time I was watching, Arteta Wenger did not need to prove anything to anyone in terms of his ability to win trophies. He had won a whole bunch of them.
Yeah.
Arteta, of course, is all we've got is the FA Cup from 2020, which was cool, and I loved it, but also was, a bit of an outlier, and also a season we finished 8th. So
you're forgetting the Community Shield we won last season.
I'm not forgetting the Community Shield. That's all I'm going to say about that.
But yeah, no, and especially given how the season is going so far in the Premier League, Champions League and League Cup and FA Cup may be our best shots at winning something.
Yeah, and we'll get to that a little later. It's kind of interesting. Arsenal has a pretty rough record in this competition. We've only ever won the League Cup, whatever its incarnation or name, twice.
Okay, twice. Wow. How long has it been running for?
Oh, since like the 70s.
1970s.
Yeah, the 1970s.
So it's a fairly new competition.
I mean, back in maybe as early as the 60s. Yeah, it's been around for a few decades. And we don't have a very good record in it. And, again, we've won the third most league titles in English history. We've won the most FA Cups in English history. We're a decorated club. And yet our record in this competition, I mean, Arsene Wenger never could. Our last title was 1994, which was predates Arsene Wenger. So I really it's kind of interesting. It's just never one we've looked into, and for a long time it was kind of one you'd look at. So the interesting thing about it, we're going to look a little ahead. The interesting thing about the tournament, how it's structured, is the semifinals are actually 2 legs. So if we beat Palace and go to the semifinals, we'll actually get 2 legs, one home, one away. And I suspect that made more sense back in the days when lower level sides were more likely to make deep runs in the competition, because, the top of the Premier League sides didn't care as much, and so they got the extra game and the extra revenue for it. But now you look at the semifinals of the League Cup; it's Liverpool, Chelsea, Manchester City every year. So it's that kind of thing has been on the chopping block for a couple of years, but so far they're still doing it. So yeah. But in the meantime, Preston North End, Jesus with a goal. This guy really needed one, and I think kind of the way I heard it described is it sort of came to him, and he kind of didn't have a chance to think about it. He just kind of reacted which
well.
Is good
yeah.
when a player's off form and he's kind of lacking confidence, as Jesus kind of might be. A chance where you don't have to think about anything and just punch it in.
Get out of his head a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, you hope sort of does it, and then full shout, Ethan Wanieri with a golazo from outside the box. Pretty impressive.
Which, by the way, an assist from Jesus. So 2 goal contributions from Jesus. But what an amazing shot, though. Perfect.
Yeah, he looked good. He looked lively. He looked exciting. I mean, 17. Yeah, not what I was doing when I was 17. And you would know, you were there when I was 17.
Right.
So I can't, it's not what either of us were doing at that age. So
no.
Well done to him.
We were in model congresses.
Good times. That's
a
podcast.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So then, we had the final goal, which, Havertz got his turn to put one in, with good build up from Saliba and Kivior, crossing to give him the header. It was, it was a good showing, clearly they weren't the strong opposition that was going to stop us, but, we did well too. We did our part. I wanted to shout out specifically Raheem Sterling. He hasn't really had too many touches, too many chances to prove himself so far of a season, and he did a lot in this match, and I liked what I saw. Really good ball handling, some key plays, keeping the ball in play, things like that. And so he didn't have any direct goal contributions, I don't think, but a valuable player in that match.
Yeah, he's an interesting one to me because he reminds me a little bit of Havertz. In that, I think we talked about this a bit, right? He comes in with a lot of experience coming out of he's won titles at City. Yeah, I think he won a title at Liverpool. Before that, he was at Chelsea. I think won a title with them. So he's won a lot as a player. But he's kind of, and part of it is just age. I mean, it's weird because it feels like Raheem Sterling, that he's a young guy. He's up and coming. He's been in the league for a decade. Like he's I think he's 30 at this point, which is not old. He said defensively. But he's a guy who's been around forever, and you kind of get the sense that the end of his career is a lot closer than the beginning of it is. But in that sense, because of the run he's had in the last few years, the way he's played overall, he probably is lacking in a bit of confidence, a lot like Havertz was when he came in. And you hope a performance like this kind of gives him a little bit more and kind of gets him going. The difference, of course, there is, I mean, Arteta played Havertz a lot to sort of work him. He had a vision in his head of the role Havertz was going to play. And Sterling doesn't play that much the same way. So,
no, and I mean, I wonder how much of that was Havertz was an acquisition onto the team, and I imagine Arteta was very much interested in developing him into what he needed him to be, whereas Sterling's on loan. I don't think we haven't talked about any prospect of him permanently joining the team, it sounds like, right? So I don't know that he would necessarily make that investment in him the same way, right?
I mean, I think there is something a little bit to that, but there's two kinds of on-loan players. There are players who are on loan because they're young and developing, and you kind of they fill a need, and they're really only there temporarily. And then there are the players who are on loan because we can't really negotiate a sale for them. Like he's going to go back. Like technically, he's under contract with Chelsea. Like I don't think Chelsea is sitting there saying to himself, "Man, can't wait till we get Sterling back." Like I don't,
okay.
I don't think they're really looking at him and sort of saying, "How do we get him back? How do we work him back into the team?" I don't think that's kind of. I think in this case he's here with Arsenal, and then it's kind of next season we'll kind of see what happens. I don't think it's completely out of the question that maybe it becomes permanent, but I don't think it's. I don't look at it as a case where Chelsea is ready to welcome him back at the end of the season. But I could be wrong about that. But yeah, he's not getting the same kind of run out that we saw with Havertz, and I think you're right. The fact he's a lone player, I think, kind of plays into that a little bit. I mean, Arteta was the assistant manager under Pep at City when Sterling was there, so he knows the player. And I feel like with Havertz, he has an idea in his head, but the role he wants Sterling to fill, and it's just a question of is he going to come good like Havertz did? Is he going to fill that role, or is it going to be like some of the other players we bought in who maybe didn't quite fit or work out in the same way?
Yeah. That makes sense. But yeah, based on his performance against Preston, I was hoping to see him when we played Newcastle, but I don't think he even ended up getting subbed in. He was just completely on the bench the whole time.
No, and I have to say, we'll talk about Newcastle more in depth in just a minute. None of the subs we made surprised me. They were kind of what I expected as the game was going along. Now, whether or not they worked, they did, but whether or not they really did what they intended to do, I think is obviously a very different question. But I did not watch that game. To me, Sterling is still very much a ways down the pecking order for a number of reasons, and not necessarily all related to him. I mean, it does say something about the general good position Arsenal is in, that a player of Raheem Sterling's experience and quality can be on our bench and not get in.
Yeah. Yeah, even with the players that we do have injured still, yeah?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Now, is there anything else you wanted to talk about the Preston North End match before we move over to Newcastle?
Not really. The bits and pieces I saw, mostly in the first half, I thought we were generally doing well in possession. We generated some chances. We got some goals. I mean, at 2-0, it was hard to see them really coming back. They had a couple of chances. They forced Setford to make one or two saves, which, good for them. But I don't think there was a lot to say in this one. Crystal Palace in mid-December. That's really kind of that's kind of it at this point.
Well, I guess the one other thing that you may not have seen in a highlights reel for it, but that was a really nice play on Preston North End's part, was in stoppage time. So 3 minutes into stoppage time is like the last significant play of the match. We had a great play on the break. It looked like Havertz and Sterling were kind of pushing up the field together, and it looked like Sterling might score. It was rolling along the pitch toward the goal line, about to go over. One of their defenders made this amazing sliding save. He ended up in the back of the net and pushed the goal off the goal line. And it could have easily been 4-0 at that point. But that was a really good defensive play.
And, cheers to never giving up on the play. Good for
right.
him.
Right.
But I mean that I may have come out sarcastically.
Yeah.
I mean,
definitely.
You can't give up, even in the circumstances. You don't give up on the play, and good for him.
Yeah. All right. So Newcastle. So as we record, this was painfully yesterday for me. I was watching it late at night yesterday, watching the full match replay. This is depressing to watch.
Yeah, we stunk.
Yeah.
I saw some conversation. There were some people, some of the more optimistic bent, sort of looking at the performance, going, "Well, if you look at it, I mean, we were about equal on expected goals, right? This is our XG reference. We were about even on expected goals. Newcastle didn't really generate a lot. I mean, that's all true, but they had one really good chance. They tore us up, and fair play to them. It was a nice run, good cross, good finish by Isak,
amazing.
And then after that, they kind of shut up shop. And I can't say it was quite the old horseshoe of death. But this is the game really looking so, God, we need Ødegaard. We really, because, today was not a good day, or yesterday, I should say, was not a good day for Leandro Trossard. And
no,
we've said a lot of nice things about Trossard. If you're making your ideal Arsenal starting 11, I don't think he's in it. And he's certainly not in it as the central midfielder. right?
Yeah.
And in a lot, I don't want to be too hard on the guy because I think some of the performance comes down to saying, well, he's not Martin Ødegaard. Well, yeah, I mean, who is other than the man himself? And it's hard to be too critical of the guy. Like, and you see this a lot with a guy like Cedric Suarez. He could come in and play a couple of games at right back, and you'd go, okay, he can do the job. He's not bad. But by the time you get to that third game, or sometimes even the fourth game, you start to watch him and you see other teams attack him, and you go, oh, that's why you're on the bench. Oh God. Oh, what have you done? And Trossard's not there, but I think he's being asked to do something that's not really. He's not going to be particularly good at, and there is still a sense that he's a bit of a limited skill set. Excuse me. Oh, sorry, late Sunday night. He's a bit of a limited skill set. I should say there were limitations to his skill set, and I don't want to put this all on Trossard, but without that going forward, you have Marino and Rice in the midfield, and it's okay. But you sort of lack, you really ideally, I think, in this instance, want Thomas Partey, who's a little bit more incisive with his passing, but he's playing right back.
Mm-hmm.
You've got Timber playing left back, which is not really his best position. You've got Martinelli and Saka. We're trying to funnel things through the wings, but every time Martinelli and Saka are going out, they're being double teamed. I mean, it was a good defensive performance by Newcastle, I have to say.
Very, yes.
And it's just, it's a physical game, but it's not, not untoward. It was, sometimes it gets frustrating and annoying, but I didn't think there was anything like line crossing here. Certainly nothing that I thought was particularly dirty or, in the moment you shout things to the TV, right? But there nothing I saw was particularly, I just thought we just weren't very good. And some of that's Newcastle. Some of that is us lacking Ødegaard and lacking a full strength Saka and clearly sort of dealing with kind of a compromised squad in some ways. And some of it was just, we were just not good. You have days like that.
Yeah, so a couple things. So with Trossard, like I wasn't focused so much on the position that he was put in. Just taking at face value his performance, he was just making mistakes that I haven't seen him. Like he was just having an off day by his own standards in any position, just setting the ball in the wrong place, like not where he intended it to go, and just not completing passes and things like that. He was just clearly off, not in his own top form, which is going to throw everything off. You mentioned that it wasn't exactly a horseshoe of death. I mean, no, but I think to me that was only because we didn't get into the final third at all. They were just like completely blocking us from the wings. So it was not a horseshoe because we weren't moving around toward the byline. We were just cut off from getting anywhere near their goal most of the match. There was a really good defense on their part. Like they just shut us down. I mean, the commentators made mention of a lot of the time they were in like a 5-4, similar to what we did against City after it was... Who was it who got sent off? Was it Trossard?
Oh, the City game. I think it was Trossard.
Yeah, I think it was.
Saliba was Bournemouth and
yeah. So after and Rice was a different game. That was earlier in the season. Right. Yeah, it's keeping track of all of our red cards of this season now. So after he was sent off and we were down one man, we did the same thing against Manchester City, right? And overall, it's like Manchester City made it way harder on us than we did against them. Like I never got the feeling like, oh, come on, we're so close. Like we weren't threatening in the same way. Like we just didn't get close enough to their goal most of the time.
Yeah, no, you're right on that. We just didn't really, it was hard for us to generate chances. We floated a few balls in the box. There were a couple of times that ball kind of rolled a little wide. There was one chance, probably the best one late, where it sort of floated across the box and Declan Rice got ahead to it, but it was at a bad angle and kind of just floated off to the side. And that was part of it too. That was something else too that I noticed is like we did have a few good chances. Most of them involved Rice. I think he was probably the one who came the closest to scoring on a few occasions. But it's just every time that there was a coin flip, like we lost the coin flip as far as Lady Luck. Like it just
conspired against us. Like we just did not, and not to say there is a conspiracy against us, but like it didn't land our way. It didn't break our way when it could break one way or another, So
and that a lot of that kind of comes from you make your own luck. I mean, we were Newcastle came at us. They were physical and not in an untoward way. But they were a physical side. They're not afraid to kind of muck things up a little bit. We've seen them over the last couple of years. This is a little bit how they play. And I do think we weren't quite as up for it as we needed to be, which is disappointing. And I'm sure Arteta has stuff to say about that. We know he's a competitive guy. We know that's last year this time, pretty much the same weekend actually, was we went up to Newcastle and lost that 1-0 on the somewhat controversial goal they scored, at least from our perspective. And we've had some struggles with them in the last couple of years under Howe and Eddie Howe with them and Arteta on our sideline. Yeah, it's frustrating. But also just a case of, in a lot of cases, it comes down to us. Like, we've got to be better. We've got to be better. And we weren't. We were just, some of that's the players are missing, guys not at full strength. But that, you can't make excuses. That's how it goes sometimes. And, I just don't think we played particularly well. I do think it's interesting to look at this game sort of a substitution pattern, sort of how we brought guys in. Because we sort of talked about this, thinking about Sterling and others. I could see the decisions they were making as far as who came in and who didn't, and it kind of made sense based on how the game was going, even if ultimately it didn't quite work out the way we would have wanted to.
Yeah. I mean, what else do you think bears mentioning before we put it behind us?
I mean, I'll say this. I think it says some interesting things. I'm kind of interested about who came into the lineup, who came into the field, right, as well as who didn't. Yeah. It was nice to see White come in, even knowing he wasn't going to necessarily be at full strength. Zinchenko was interesting to get a run out, although I don't think he did much of anything. Jesus came in. At that point, he was on for Trossard, but Trossard had been Martinelli had been subbed off, so Trossard was filling Martinelli's role on the left. I don't think the criticism of Martinelli is that he only has one move, which is just try to dribble past or through somebody, and he kind of needs a second move. Jesus tries to do that against 2 or 3 players, and it's just, again, we talk about that confidence sense. I didn't get the same sense of a guy who was as confident. I mean, he didn't look unconfident. Like we've seen unconfident players look like players who are lacking in that. I don't think he's there, but I also don't think he's not where he needs to be, where we need him to be either. We saw Ethan Nwaneri come in. I have to say, I mean, he had an incident at the top of their box where he cuts across the box and gets a shot off. Now, compare that to the Preston game. Similar situation, similar distance, similar turn. The Preston game, he has the time and space to turn and put it into the top shelf,
Yeah.
Against Newcastle, against a Premier League team, and a solid Premier League team. Not a great one, but certainly a solid one. They step out. He doesn't have time. He isn't able to turn his body, and so he's open. He's too open on the shot, and the ball just sails up into the second deck. So
right.
There's the difference there between, we've talked about getting Nwaneri in and when are we going to see this kid and how's it going to play out? The Premier League's a different animal. And once you start getting in like Newcastle, who is a big physical team, that's going to be really hard. He is 17. Like, as talented as he is, there's a physicality that comes with age that he's just not going to have. Like, presumably his body literally cannot do that right now. And so, you saw some of the limitations there. And as much as we'd love to see him get more run in the Premier League, and yes, on a purely technical level, he is probably the best replacement we have for Ødegaard. But to stick him in, especially in the games we're playing, away to Newcastle, away to Chelsea next weekend, that's a lot to ask of a 17-year-old. And he's good, but he's not that good.
Right. Nope. So one thing that this the question that this leads to is, so right now, as I look at the table now that the weekend's matches are over, We are currently in the Europa League spot, which is not great. We've got Chelsea and Forest ahead of us, and then Manchester City in number 2 and Liverpool at 1. We are 7 points behind number 1 right now, Liverpool. What do you think that portends for the rest of the season? Do we have a shot at the title still?
So I've heard a lot of different interpretations of this. I want to be very careful about what I say here because some of it involves math, which is always a very dangerous thing for me. The pessimistic perspective, and I'll quote James McNicholas, Gunner blog on this one, that you sort of get the feeling that maybe it's just not our year. And that happens. Especially in a competition that's so based on the cumulative effects. Like in so many American leagues, you look and go, it's not really our year. What I'd be saying to myself at this point is, look, let's just get healthy for the playoffs. But of course, that doesn't happen.
Right.
That doesn't happen here. So, in that sense, 7 points adrift of Liverpool, it would take a lot. Like we're sort of like we lost, was it 5 games last season? This is an absurd record, by the way. But we lost 5 games last year and still wound up a point shy. We've already lost 2 and drawn 3. Like we're already not, we're about a quarter of the way through the season. So that's a tough thing to sort of look at. The counter argument, though, is, look at the teams ahead of us. Liverpool's been good this season. But there's also a pretty good argument to be made. They're overperforming some of their underlying metrics. They have had, away to Arsenal excluded, a relatively easy schedule, and we've talked about ours being fairly difficult to this point. It'll all even out in the end, right? We're going to play we play the same teams home and away, obviously. The counter argument to that counter argument, of course, is that Liverpool, as they settle in under Slot, will actually become a stronger side in the second half of the season, perhaps. But it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. You have City; they just lost after we played. They lost to Bournemouth,
right,
and they're without Rodri, who just won the Golden Ball, the Ballon d'Or. Who's he's not indispensable, but he pretty much won. I think between him and Spain, I don't think he lost a game last season. A game where he was in the lineup. So to be without him is a difficult thing. And, we always feel like, City will come right. They'll lock in. Maybe. But they're also underperforming some of their metrics a little bit. So, the optimistic perspective there is that both those teams maybe aren't quite as good as their numbers as their records suggest. And then you've got Forest. Listen, I'm pretty sure I called Forest as a team to get relegated. I was probably wrong about that. Forest is not going to finish in the top 30. Let's all be honest with ourselves here. This is great for them. I'm glad they're playing well and all of that. Actually, on behalf of my old friend who's a Derby fan and therefore hates Forest, I'm not glad they're playing well at all. But in all seriousness, they good for them for the start they've had. I would be beyond shocked if Forest was in a Champions League spot by the end of the season. We're sitting here level on points with Chelsea and Aston Villa, both of whom I think could be in there, but I think we're better than both of them. We already have a win at Villa. We'll see Chelsea next week. Chelsea's an interesting one. Very dangerous offensively, especially with Palmer, but also very, obviously a bit shakier in the back. Although we say that they've conceded 12 goals on the season, we've conceded 11. So, but then again, so City, which is weird. You look at the table and say to yourself, I've heard some suggestion, like last year it was 90 some points to win the league. It's probably not going to be that this year. But that being said, you kind of hope that this is it, that this is the stretch where we're where we're shaky and wobbly and we can come out of this and get some results, especially towards the end of the year. And then, we'll see who kicks on after the new year. It's not necessarily going to get easier from here in that regard. What I'd say is I don't think the league is over. It's November 3rd. The league is not over yet. Nobody's won anything yet. And the only thing you can really worry about is winning games in front of you. String a couple wins together, and we'll see where we are.
Right.
And I think, string a couple wins together, and we'll see where we are. And by the time we get to, I guess that part of me wants to say, let's come back after the holiday fixtures, at which point we're halfway through the season, and then you can really start to see the separation. But we'll see how it goes. It's fairly tight this year, which I think is good for competitive sake. Maybe not so good for the blood pressure sake, but this is what we signed up for.
Yeah. All right. So, given again that you kind of didn't see the whole Preston North End match, who would be your player of the week?
So I'm going to go with Ethan Nwaneri. I think his performance against Preston was a positive. And I think even though he wasn't particularly good against Newcastle, first off, nobody was particularly good against Newcastle. And I think he deserves some credit for being able to come in and get that Premier League time in a difficult situation. Even if it didn't go very well, I think the larger experience hopefully will stand him in good stead as the season progresses, and maybe he works his way into the lineup a bit more as the season goes on. So I'm going to say Nwaneri, mostly on the back of the Preston performance and just kind of showing up really for Newcastle.
Yeah, so I kind of have rules that nobody but myself is putting upon me for who I can and can't include in player of the week. And so taking each match in isolation, Nwaneri definitely player of the match against Preston North End. Possibly Sterling kind of vying for it. Like I might have highlighted him, but Sterling did not play at all in the Newcastle match. So that to me is a disqualification when we're talking about the whole week. Declan Rice, kind of the same thing. Like I would probably pick him as the single player with the biggest contribution toward the Newcastle match. He had the best chances. He got closest to the goal multiple times. I would pick him, but I don't think he played at all in the Preston North End match. So really that leaves me with the same conclusion as you, and I do pick Ethan Nwaneri. I try to always highlight a different player, but I think we're short of choices this week. And he was good, not taking anything away from him. I mean, his goal at Preston North End was amazing, and he had a couple of good chances against Newcastle. Didn't quite go his way, but I'm all for him getting that experience in the Premier League, because it does seem like within a couple of years or so, he could be someone who we're looking at like Saka at that age, so.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this about Declan Rice, and this comes to the expectation game, right? Nwaneri's 17. The fact that he played and wasn't completely awful against Newcastle is kind of a mark in his favor. Good job, right?
Right.
Whereas Declan Rice, our expectations are so much higher. Like I was all about his performance against Liverpool and his dangerousness on his deliveries. His set piece delivery was not good yesterday.
No.
I like, again, with it to miss the chance he missed there is kind of, I don't want to say unforgivable, but for a veteran player who plays that kind of important role on the side, you can't miss that, man.
Yeah. I mean, but there was that one, but then there was also the one where he kicked it and almost got in the corner, but it had a deflection that sent it just barely wide of the post. Like he had multiple chances. There's at least like 2, maybe even 3 that I can think of that were close, where he was the one who got closest. But still, like I said, disqualified from player of the week this particular week due to not playing in the cup. So
you have standards, and I respect that.
I try. So what's coming up for next week?
Right. So 2 big ones as we head into an international break. The first, on Wednesday, we go to the San Siro, which is so much fun to say. I mean, Arsenal goes away to Inter Milan in the Champions League. That'll be on Paramount Plus. This is why you play the Champions League. To play a game at a famous away stadium, I know, again, you're kind of the limited Champions League experience on your end, right?
Yeah.
Get some time to watch them play. And the San Siro in Milan is one of the cathedrals of the sport. Be able to see that, to say Arsenal is going to Milan is going to be a lot of fun. More importantly, I don't want to lock us into win at home, draw on the road. but I'd be happy to walk out of Milan with a point.
Right.
More happy to walk out with 3, but I'll take 1. But that's in the midweek, and then the weekend on Sunday, our last game before the break, Arsenal are away to Chelsea. We go to Stamford Bridge. This is kind of a weird derby in the sense that actually I think we have a better record over the last couple of years at Stamford Bridge than we do at the Emirates. I feel like I actually feel pretty confident going there. I feel much less confident if the game was at home. I don't know what to make of that. But we're away to Chelsea, which again, that's now 3. Yeah, it's going to be 4 straight away games. Newcastle, Inter Milan, and Chelsea in succession is delightful. But then we get an international break. It'd be nice to sort of hopefully take a breather there. And then, oh, look, it's 3rd place Forest right afterwards. But anyway, yeah, that'll be on USA Network. So Milan on Wednesday, Paramount Plus, Chelsea on Sunday, USA Network.
Right. Thanks for joining us at Gooner U. If you're watching on YouTube, you can also listen to our show on Apple, Spotify, and some other places. If you're only listening, try watching us on YouTube with the link in the show notes. Your homework for today is to tell one friend about Gooner U. And also, voting in the U.S. election this Tuesday the 5th is an acceptable substitute. We record the show using Zencastr. If you'd like to try it out, you can support Gooner U by signing up using the link in the description, which also has links to everything we talk about and our social pages. Again, my name is Dove, and you can find me on Twitter at Dove Frankel. With me, as always, is Keith, and you can find him in a pub watching Arsenal matches.
And London is red.